Hello there. As a preview of some of the more professional and scripted work that we're going to do over the weekend, I'd like to give you a brief introduction to the ideas of science and spirituality. Most of the time when we think of science and spirituality, what we're thinking of is one that is just the facts, and other which seems like flight of fancies. You hear some spiritual teachers and they're all like, everything is love and light and it's all happy and everything, but that's not the world that we live in. Everything is kind of, the middle ground. What you end up finding, and what we'll discuss in greater detail, is that when you're looking at science and spirituality, you see two people doing the exact same job, but looking in opposite directions. Imagine you had somebody who was born into a cave. They were born into a cave, and they never really went out into the world. And then somebody who was born outside of that cave and looking into it, never really having gone in there. And so when they start off in their journeys, they are starting off in opposite directions, going the exact same places. When you see a scientist, what they're doing is they're taking their mind, going through their five senses, out into the world, and they're exploring in ever either larger or smaller detail. So looking as they go down and down and down, breaking things into their parts and separating the wholes that we see, planet and things, bringing it down into its smaller and smaller bits, all the way until they get into these complex ideas and they reach the spot where it just becomes pure energy in some state of potential that, depending on how it's excited, becomes whatever. And when you go into spirituality, what you see is the exact same process going the other way. Instead of taking the mind and going out through the five senses and exploring the world, you take the mind and you start turning it in on itself and bring it in and in and in and in and stripping away all the parts, taking what seems like to be a person, a personality, and breaking its pieces down step by step by step by step until finally you end up at this place where it's just energy in a state of potential, where is the slightest willing, it pops into some sort of state of being. And all of those things in our lives follow that pattern. The big difference is that in science, if we're looking at a chair, and we are like, there is a chair, and everyone goes, yes, that's a chair. When we're talking about the mind, on the other hand, everyone has the exact same mind with all kinds of different variations. Just like there's 100 different types of chairs, but they all do the exact same function. And so what we get to do here is look at how do we actually label the things that are going on in our mind. So when you go back to all of those science people, they have the most basic language. Here is the world as we see it, as all of us see it in the very thing. So here's our mind as we see it, as it normally is. But as you start going deeper and deeper into science, you start getting into things that you can't readily see. You can't readily say, hey, look there's an atom. No, you can't do that. You can only use symbolisms, models, and mathematics as a language to describe how it actually functions. Same thing happens with the mind. Since it's a subjective thing, you can't just say, hey, everybody, look into my head and see this mental image or this, experience that I'm having and have the opportunity to go and verify it in that way. And so you have to first be a good observer, both as a scientist and as an individual. If you're not a good observer of nature and yourself, then you're going to have a really hard time, one, quantifying and turning that into any kind of usable language that you can then turn around and express to someone else. So one of the biggest things in science, one of the reasons it has such validity is because they follow a method that allows the reproduction of an experiment. But in spirituality, what you end up having, and you keep finding over and over again, is that if you don't have both a good observer, or if you have a good observer who's a spiritual practitioner, but they're not a good communicator of the ideas and the concepts, and they can't find a relatable one-to-one model that somebody else can then go into their own mind, reproduce the experiments, and get the same results. And without that common language, you get all of these variations. Somebody goes into a deep trance state, or a deep meditative state, or a hypnotic state, whatever they want to call it, and they see a vision of a something, right? And they come up from it and they're like, oh my God, I found the answers to the universe. I've seen this thing. And somebody else is like, well, I've never seen anything like that. It doesn't exist. That doesn't mean it didn't exist to them in their head. There's the whole part of subjectivity. Now, the thing is that whatever it was that they saw in their head will be in yours. It'll be the exact same thing that you're experiencing in your own head, but you're labeling it different, you're experiencing it different because of the the perceptions that you use to define your reality. And what we get the opportunity to do through this work is see that what they're doing is following down and down, and then they get to a point where the language starts to get very complex. Because if you talk to a really high-powered brain mathematician, computer scientist, and you try to talk to them on their level, it's incomprehensible. Totally incomprehensible. And the same thing goes with somebody who has a powerful, mystical experience, and you can't relate to them either. I mean, for me personally, the first 5 of the 11 years after I had my mystical experience that totally transformed my life, I had no way to describe it. I spent the first 5 years relating it to Star Wars, Matrix, and Fight Club, and some of the easy concepts that come out of there that are most relatable to how the mind works. Also found Buddhism and other different religious concepts that were out there that I was able to take their language and then slowly start to repopulate my experiences with a new set of language. And where we are now, 11 years later, is a fully developed language system. Just like in science with quantum physics and quantum mechanics, there is a fully developed language system of how to take somebody from, I just know that trees are good, to here's how the universe works. Well, the same thing is, I just know that I exist, or at least I perceive that I exist, and here's how the mind, quote, the universe works. And what we're going to do in these series of just random me sitting in my truck talking to you as a normal person, and the more well-scripted and hopefully with a little bit of production value, because that would be awesome, is to take those ideas and flesh them out in such a way that it's relatable on a normal level, but also will give you all the context to take you from here to here, but with all of the context so that you actually understand what the heck we're saying. And that you'll start to realize that the difference between a scientist and a spiritualist is literally, a scientist is somebody who is looking out through their life towards the nature reality, and somebody who's looking in towards the nature reality, and at some point, boom, they come right back around and meet up. So that's the general gist of the direction that we're going, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I hope you guys have a great rest of the day, and I'm going to post this on YouTube just as it is. Just go for it as it is, and let's have some fun. See ya.